This is Jeff Mucci with RCR Wireless News, and today we're going to be featuring the Linux Foundation, talking about their training and certification programs. We're delighted to have Clyde Seepersad, who is General Manager of Training and Certification for the Linux Foundation. Clyde, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jeff. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we were just chatting, and it turns out we both live in Austin, Texas.
How come horns?
Well, I'm not a Horn fan yet. I'm actually went to Clemson, so we got a big game coming up soon.
You've had a great season.
Yeah, we have. Well, I think we were just chatting before we started this session about the depth and breadth of the Linux community here in Austin compared to Silicon Valley. And maybe I'd love to hear your thoughts comparing and contrasting the two communities.
Sure. Yeah. Austin has been an amazing market for tech, right? Silicon Hills versus Silicon Valley.
Yep.
And a lot of the same trends that you hear happening in the Valley are very real in Austin. You know, prior to my joining LF, for instance, I was with a mid-sized software company, and we just had the trickiest time hiring Linux admins. There is a lot of talent, but it is very much spoken for. And there are a lot of VC firms coming in. There's a lot of experienced firms expanding. Yeah, it is a great time to be a Linux sysadmin or engineer, regardless of where you live.
Well, other than Silicon Valley and Austin, what are some of the other hotspots for Linux system admin talent?
You know, it really is everywhere, Jeff. It's the typical places you might expect, Boston with its tech sector. But the thing that has really been interesting the past several years is the breadth of acceptance of Linux, right? And you probably know the stats, right? It's
I don't know the stats. I'd love to.
All right, then.
Really, our first question on the briefing was, you know, the breadth and scope of the community. Let's dive in.
Let's dive in. It is, Linux is everywhere, right? The casual user has an Android smartphone. 95% of supercomputers, 85% of web servers, near 99% of cloud-hosted infrastructure, including over a quarter on Microsoft's Azure infrastructure and growing. And Linux really is the new normal. This whole next generation of open source technologies runs on Linux. And so I know in particular for your wireless audience, there's just been huge adoption, not just for Linux as a base, but for all these open source technologies that build on it. So things like OpenStack and things like containerization and the next wave of software-defined networking and function virtualization, they all assume Linux. And so, it's not just a startup thing. It's not just a web thing. It's not just a hardware thing. It really is everywhere. And that's part of why we've invested in our training mission, because it turns out when you've won on the software side, the next battle is on the people side and making sure there is enough talent to go around.
So walk us through some of your organization, what you have available, and I know you're going to walk us through some almost demos later, but you've identified the need for training certification, but talk us through your strategy and some of the programming you have available.
Sure. So we started with our core, right? So if you look back several years, we were doing a lot of in-person, expert-led developer training on core topics like kernel internals or device drivers or embedded Linux development or adding on Yocto. And we still do that today. Where we've invested more over the past few years has been on sysadmins and engineers and network engineers and beefing up our portfolio there. So we start with the really entry-level stuff. For example, we have an introduction to Linux course up on one of the college-type platforms. It's called edX, edx.org. It's an open source, not-for-profit. And we put that course up, and we have had over 500,000 people enroll in that free introduction to Linux course. Every country, I think except North Korea, there's just a huge groundswell of interest. And we've built from there. So we've got that as a really broad, open introduction to Linux, self-paced, fully online, heavily video, very hands-on, moving up to more advanced introductory work to becoming a system administrator, and that tees up to our certification program, which I'll talk about in a bit. But then really building on top of that to open it up to all the open source platforms that are becoming standard. And so not just things that you might traditionally expect, like performance tuning on Linux or networking in Linux, but really all this next wave of technology. So great interest in KVM, for instance, as an open source free hypervisor. We've got programs on that. We've been investing in developing programs that your audience probably cares about for things like software-defined networking with Open Daylight, for things like network function virtualization, and this continued abstraction of more and more functionality into the software layer, away from the hardware layer, because there's all kinds of benefits. The companies love this stuff. It really helps with scalability in an on-demand type cloud-based world. And so we've been pretty systematically going through and adding new content. And the underlying theme is, although our name is the Linux Foundation, we're really about all these open source projects that's changing the way networking is done, it's changing the way virtualization, the way infrastructure is spun up, spun down, apps are spun up, spun down. And so we've gone well beyond what I call just Linux, and to really try to reach out and to be a neutral, hands-on based, trying to develop hands-on skills, access gateway to all of these open source technologies that matter and that are being adopted in the wireless industry and beyond.
Well, you've thrown out a couple significant statistics. Number one, the initial Linux program, over 500,000 participants. And then you talked about in the cloud, I think you said 95 to 90% of cloud systems are Linux based. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's about right.
So how big is the Linux software development community?
It's hard to put an exact number on it. It is large. It is growing. You look at all these projects, and they all have thousands of contributors to them. You may have seen the recent report that the Linux Foundation issued on the value of open source software, over $5 billion in economic value just in the past few years, excluding Linux, right? These are all the other collaborative projects, we call them, that we host at Linux. So, it's tens of thousands, it's hundreds of thousands of developers. They live all over the world. And then on the flip side, of course, it's millions of admins and engineers who run the systems that we depend on every day.
Millions, you say? So what's a typical career path for someone who moves through the Linux career path?
We draw a little bit of a distinction between the folks on the developer side and the people who operate the systems, the sysadmins, the engineers. On the developer side, it's very much people start quite often very young with writing code and experimenting, and they discover Linux, and then they discover all these other open source projects that are out there, so OpenStack, Cloud Foundry, Open Daylight, and they get involved, and they progressively just specialize in a subset of those and develop more and more code and start contributing patches and upgrades. Mm-hmm. And so that's a very organic development path. On the sysadmin side, it tends to really take one of so what we think of as three major career paths. So you start, you're the guy getting the 3 a.m. call that something is going on with a server.
Yeah.
And you hope to progress beyond that. And, typically what you start then seeing is some folks getting into kind of the cloud and virtualization path, which obviously is becoming the new normal. Right. You see some folks going down what we call the DevOps path, where you're starting to do things like, executing systems at scale, tools like Puppet, tools like Chef, starting to tweak and refine your Linux kernel to really make sure that you're kind of honing in and having that functionality. And then your classic network engineer path, right? And that's where some of the big disruption is starting to happen with moving that moving the functionality into the software layer for defining networks.
What can you tell us about compensation ranges and just give me some benchmarks or bookends around the career growth?
Yeah, I was looking at some stats. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics provides this stuff. It's a little bit dated, but it gives you a good sense of the direction. Network engineer salaries, I believe the U.S. median is something like $85,000. Of course, in the Bay Area and in Austin, it gets to be more than that. So, these are very well compensated fields. I think the median for a starting system administrator in Linux is in the range of $55,000 to $60,000.
Right.
And you progress up, you do networking. And there's just such a large demand. I was looking on Indeed.com yesterday as I was prepping for this call, and it's astonishing. There's over 60,000 open positions for network engineers. There's almost as many open positions for network administrators. and they've got a top 10 list, and both of those positions are on there, alongside some of the things that you might think of, like big data and graphic design. So not only are the salaries high, but there's just galloping demand. And that's really where, as the Linux Foundation, we're trying to step in and say, hey, it's a great time. There's this growing need, and there's not enough folks out there. And so we really want to step in and help fill that gap.
How do you have to have a college degree?
You do not. One of the really interesting things, and this is not just limited to Linux and the open source system. I saw something a few weeks ago that Accenture is no longer requiring a college degree. I think what we see is there's a growing shift towards a performance-based world of I want to see what you can do. So it's nice to know that you have a degree that sends certain signals about stick-to-itiveness and being able to focus and being willing to invest in yourself. But really the skills that employers are telling us matter is these projects are coming out in open source. They are evolving rapidly. They're emerging rapidly. 2 years ago, people sort of vaguely understood what a container was and thought it was this old Linux virtual machine thing. And now all of a sudden, Docker and Rocket, and people need to bring themselves up to speed. So it's very much about, are you staying at the edge of where these new technologies are going, and are you able to demonstrate proficiency, right? Hands-on proficiency is what employers tend to care about. And that doesn't mean that degree programs are going away, but it certainly means you can build a really viable long-term career path in open source without having to have that gate check of a college degree.
You've got a great video. I think it's about 1.5 minutes on your website that talks about being certified. Can you really do what you say you do? So resumes come in, they say I'm Linux certified, but then you get in the chair and actually have to start working, and can you really do it? So well, let's move on to the announcement I saw this week, and one of our editors during one of his programs, and it was an NFV SDN program, mentioned that Linux Foundation had partnered with or announced an OpenStack Administrative Fundamental course. So why was the course added, and what can you tell us about the course and the relationship with OpenStack?
Sure. So let me start with the relationship with the OpenStack Foundation. They are doing phenomenal work. It's an amazing project. Obviously, huge companies, Walmart, PayPal, eBay are investing heavily. But it is following the classic model that we're seeing unfold, which is there's a huge amount of interest. People are aware of the massive benefits from treating, being able to do the, IaaS, right, infrastructure as a service. And what you hear repeatedly is we don't have the talent. We want to implement this project. We conceptually understand the benefits. And so the OpenStack Foundation has partnered with the Linux Foundation to stand up a certification exam for entry-level professionals called the Certified OpenStack Administrator. And Jonathan Bryce spoke about this recently at their Tokyo Summit. It's launching next spring in tandem with the next OpenStack Summit, which is in our neck of the woods in Austin. And that's really geared towards saying, we need a common baseline for employers to understand who has the skills necessary, because there's two components there. One is there's not enough people who have the skills. The second is the people who have the skills cannot afford to be spending an hour per person interviewing just to try to figure out, is this person competent, or did they just read an article and then walk into my office? And so it's actually cutting on both sides in terms of how do we address not just the talent shortage, but how do we make that process of finding talent more efficient if you're one of these companies that's trying to invest. So we think that certification, it's performance-based. There's no pick and answer out of a lineup. You've got your blinking command line and you've got your tasks. And either you can do that in a timed environment with a proctor monitoring you, which, begins to approximate the stress of being a real-life admin, or you can't. And if you can and you're above the bar, that tells employers a lot about what you need. Now, the other part of this equation is not only are there not enough engineers at work, there aren't enough people who are deeply experienced, who have the interest or bandwidth to teach it to the next generation of people coming up. And so we have had instructor-led programs on this for over a year. They are tremendously well received, but it's not scalable, right? The size of the demand that is out there, you cannot possibly hope to meet that because there's just not enough professional instructors And that's before you consider the implications of not everybody can take 4 or 5 days off to come sit in one of these programs and the cost that is associated. Mm-hmm. And so we looked at that and said, okay, what can we do? Because we're having success with the instructor-led, but there's clearly a much bigger market. And so we went to the drawing board and said, well, how do you do this? You do this using the technologies we have. You take it to the web, you make it self-paced, but you keep it hands-on. And so that's what we're really excited about is we took our curriculum, we redeveloped it given a model that says there's not an expert instructor standing over your shoulder. So we had to break the content down, make it more modular, make it easier and more linear to follow. But we also had to figure out how are we going to help people develop the skill sets? And that's the piece that we invested a lot of time, and the team here is phenomenal. They've done a great job of creating what we're calling labs on demand, which essentially allows you as the student, as you're going through this program, every 10 or 15 minutes, we're asking you to do an exercise. One of the challenges with OpenStack, as newbies will tell you, is it can be difficult and challenging to spin up fresh instances. And so we do that for the user. You click a button, it spins up a fresh instance of OpenStack in a browser with a terminal emulator. You hack away, and if you break it, you press refresh, you wait a minute, it refreshes the entire thing, and you go again. And that's really critical. So people come into these new technologies, you learn by breaking things, and what not to do again. Now, we've designed this to make it easy and stress-free for users as they go in there to play with it and discover it, just like folks would have done and do today when they're installing Linux on the machine. And really getting over that hump of people being unwilling to fully experiment because it can be tricky to set up until you become experienced. So that 1-2 combination of presenting the information in a really modular, accessible way, but then absolutely requiring that hands-on experience without putting the burden on the user to spin up the environment. We think that's the sweet spot to really help make sure that the talent growth can follow along with the interest growth.
Got it. What's the difference between the OpenStack Admin course and the existing Linux System Admin course?
So our System Admin course on Linux is really for folks coming in sort of trying to operate in a Linux ecosystem. Mm-hmm. We have the instructor-led version of our OpenStack course, which covers much of the same material. But when you have a live instructor in the room, you're able to have a more organic discussion. You're able to tailor it a bit more. You can dive deep in certain areas or skip past. What you have in a self-paced course is you really have to present the full spectrum of material and allow the users to decide, hey, I know this chapter, this is something I've done, I'm going to skip past it. Or no, I'm really new, I really want to be taken step by step by step. So it's more comprehensive, the material, so that the user has the full array of topic material. We don't expect that everybody will need all of it, but we expect some people will need all of it. And so therefore we've presented it in a very linear, very modular way so that as users go through, they can consume the pieces they need, they can skip over the pieces they don't, and ultimately prepare them, because what we want is for them to go take that OpenStack certification, right, to be able to demonstrate to employers that they don't just know it conceptually, that they can do it.
Are you targeting, with respect to the OpenStack Admin fundamentals, are you targeting employees of employers, or who exactly are you trying to reach and build up competencies?
Yeah, we're targeting the individuals because that's where talent gets built. Sometimes that might come to us as an employer saying, I have a team of 5 people and I want to develop those skills. Sometimes that might be individuals who are deciding they want to add the skill to their repertoire. We don't really try to distinguish between the two. One of the things we're lucky to be able to do as a Linux Foundation is we have we have a pretty big megaphone when we start talking about these projects and creating awareness. In this case, we want to use that megaphone to reach a really big audience and communicate that this is a novel way that we're trying to bring forward to try to solve this really thorny issue of how do you get on a fast-moving project that is fairly new, where there isn't a large installed base of knowledgeable individuals, And we're going to allow folks to self-select it. It won't be for everyone, but we use our megaphone and we try to let folks decide whether this is right for them and not really differentiate too much between are they coming on, as a corporate, a corporate placement for employees versus an individual. Because at the end of the day, what matters to us is that the individuals have the skill set, because that's really that's what's going to make a difference, whether they're coming through their company or not.
Well, you mentioned several times early in the conversation about our audience, the telcos and the mobile operators who are looking to virtualize elements and create cloud offerings for enterprise. Is OpenStack, this course really being driven by the carriers, or is it driven out of enterprise demand?
I think it's both. We're seeing traditional, what I would call traditional enterprises using this as they try to make their infrastructure more flexible. But we are absolutely seeing just a ton of interest in the wireless space for all the reasons you might imagine, right? The idea of making your networks flexible, scalable, less hardware dependent is hugely attractive. Of course, now the trick is to figure out which pieces fit with us. Do I have the employees who can implement it? How do I pilot it? How do I get comfortable with putting it into production? And a big piece of that is getting comfortable that you have the employee base that has the skill set.
Well, the course is open for registration today with the target start date of January 19th. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay, and then the exam, which is jointly developed between Linux and OpenStack, will be available in April. Tell me again about that, the exam. How intense is it, and what does it look like, and what can you expect if you're a candidate?
So you can expect a appropriately challenging exam. And I think one of the lessons that we've learned from the past couple of years of having our own performance-based certification is that even experienced people need to prepare. You're not going to be able to Google or hop on IRC and get hints. You're going to have to go to the documentation if you're being asked to perform something that you might be a little bit rusty on. And, it's interesting looking at some experienced candidates as they take these exams. And the default is, go to the web, go to my channel, see what's out there. But in reality, in many industries, when you're at work, you don't have that luxury. You might not have an open network where you can go look the stuff up. And so it definitely is, we did the OpenStack Foundation did a great job of coordinating the sort of diagnostic and psychometric piece of this to figure out what are the appropriate skills that we should be asking of a certified OpenStack professional. And if you go to their website now and you look at openstack.org and you search for Certified OpenStack Administrator, they do have the page that describes the program. They have a link to the knowledge competencies that are expected on the exam. Obviously, not every single competency is tested, otherwise you'd be there for 3 days.
Yeah.
But like all exams, there's a sample of items that's chosen to be on the test itself. It's 100% performance-based. It is, if you can prove that you can do this subset, the sample of the domains and competencies, our psychometricians are telling us they have confidence that is a good representation that you have the skills needed to represent yourself as a entry-level OpenStack professional.
So just to be clear, is the exam going to be an online exam, or will they have to go somewhere and physically sit in a room with the proctor monitoring their test?
Good question. Last time I checked, we're in 2015. We're almost 2016. The idea that you have to get in your car or onto a bus and drive somewhere to take a technology exam is a little bit bizarre. We are 100% web-based. You need to be, have your internet connection and a webcam and a browser. Because guess what? That's how work happens in the 21st century. The idea of having to drive somewhere is just, we needed to leave that back behind in the 80s and 90s and step up to the next generation of it. These are the technologies that we use every day. There is no reason we should not be using them when we're testing for skill sets.
So will it start at 8 o'clock, end at 5 o'clock with breaks in between, and there'll be a proctor monitoring a lot of students taking the test at the same time?
I wouldn't say a lot of students. The proctors monitor, they have a maximum of how many they can monitor. It is a flexible schedule. And so again, unlike the physical proctoring centers, the exams, these web-based exams are available 24/7, 365. So you as the candidate pick a time that is convenient for you. It does not have to be in the middle of the workday. It could potentially be on a weekend. It goes all night if you happen to be the type of person who wants to take it at night. There's a roster of available time slots. You pick a slot that works for you. You get into a appropriate location where you don't have distractions or assistants and aids, and you fire up your browser and you take the exam.
And there'll be people monitoring that exam.
Yes, there's a live human proctor. It's really, it's amazingly powerful. Right? Again, these are the technologies that are available. They can see your webcam, they can see your screen, they can hear your microphone. And it's really fascinating to look at one of these sessions. Just the webcam, it's amazing how, if you were to look down just to your keyboard, I would be able to tell. If you were to look off to the side, I would be able to tell. In a way that you actually cannot do if you're an instructor in a large room with 50 people taking 10 different exams.
Right.
Because I've basically got direct eyes on you, and I've got a recording of this entire session that is stored for several days afterwards, so that you don't have the he said, she said of, well, I already was not doing that. Mm-hmm. We've had really the past year and a half, really great experience with this platform. We don't see any sort of significant level of attempts to cheat. And frankly, if you're able to, put something together that's sophisticated enough to try to end run the system, you're competent enough that you can just pass it. It's going to be less stress on your life to just do what's on the exam versus trying to create, a Rube Goldberg contraption to get around it.
Well, what can you show us about the course? And I'm going to let you share the screen and just talk about what you're doing.
All right, so I'm going to just pop one of these up here. And you should have the screen share up and running now. This is just a visual.
Yeah.
So, we try to make the material accessible, and you may not hear the audio on this. We have a little bit of an intro video. This is Tim Sarowitz. He is phenomenal. He's our instructor. And he sets up each section just to try to create a little bit of that human connection while you're sitting there in front of your computer. This is the work in progress version. As you mentioned, the full course comes live. So I'm doing the dangerous thing of showing a not quite finished product. But I'll just scroll through here just to give you a quick visual sense of the approach, which is to really try to go step by step through the material and build on it. Have the content pieces that communicates the concepts that people need to learn, and then move that into starting to test for it. So some things like you're seeing on the screen now, which are very simple sort of tests of recollections. But then the key piece is when you get to the labs, right? And so we're having a lot of these labs layered in because really what we want you to do is to be able to demonstrate your competence. And so you come in here, you have your labs and solutions, which is a document you download that tells you what are you supposed to be doing. And if you can either wait till you're done to skip ahead to the solutions, or if you're feeling a little squirrely, you can go ahead and peek at the solutions. It's entirely up to you. But then you launch your lab environment, which is really the key piece of it. And I'm going to.
So you're launching a dynamic web instance for the developer.
That's right. That's the key part of making this real and making this something that that hands-on, getting that hands-on practice is what we think is critical. I just toggled over here. Let me know if you're on my new screen. Otherwise, I'll toggle.
So I see a developer screen there. Yep.
This is loaded in the browser window. It's a live command line. You can get in here and, it's a full live system. And if you poke around and you change some settings that you wish you hadn't, you just come up over here, you click start over, and you wait, a minute or so, and it'll refresh this for you. And so it's, take away a little bit of that pain of, I hope I don't break the system because it's going to take me 45 minutes to stand it back up. And so by providing reliable access to the infrastructure, taking away that fear factor, just, roll your sleeves up, start getting to learn how the thing actually works. Because that's what we think is critical, right? At the end of the day, you need to know conceptually what all the elements are, but what you really, really need is the hands-on practice. And so that's what we're really excited to be able to kind of bring to this audience of folks who want to learn OpenStack, is the ability to get in, practice in a scalable, convenient way at home, and learn it, right? And get ready to be able to go take the exam and be able to demonstrate to employers that they have these skills.
Now, can you bring up, or I could bring up, are there other screens you want to show us? Was there a third screen?
I'm going to just toggle over here. This is sort of related. This is the Linux Foundation certification exams and the infrastructure that you use. The OpenStack exam is using the same underlying engine, so the experience is going to be similar. So, it's web-based. You log in, you can see the exam. In this case, it's our Linux Foundation sysadmin exam. People tend to forget there's a checklist to take you through to, make sure that you're ready, make sure you have your ID, and then you have the exam open and available here to just launch and take you to another window to open it up. I had this one scheduled. We've run a little long. I'm going to take a flyer here and see if it is left my eligibility open, because I'm one of the things that candidates have is a little bit of grace period. You see on the screen there, my original reservation was for 11 Central. We're at 11:46, so there's a decent chance it'll tell me that I've missed my window now.
Okay.
But basically, it gives you a sense for what the experience is. You toggle over. There's a proctor there. Let's see if it'll excuse my lateness. The proctor checks your ID, confirms that you are who you say you are, confirms that there's not 6 people huddled around you feeding you the answer, and fires it up here. So let's just run for a second and see if we get in. But you get a sense for it. It's all sort of traditional web-based workflows. All the warnings, the do's and don'ts. Here's how to not get yourself in trouble while you take the exam. And it just pulls it up, in a window there. It's asking me to do my sharing. So I'm going to share my camera, share my desktop. The proctor comes online, verifies that I am who I say I am, and releases the exam to me. And then I'm going to have my control panel open up here, and I'll be off to the races.
That's fascinating. This is looks to be a fairly sophisticated learning management system. What are you using?
We put this together using a range of open source technologies. In this case, we're using the actual proctors are by PSI, which is one of the 3 largest exam companies in the world. And so their piece of it, which is providing the experienced proctors who understand workflow. But it's all web based. It's all open source driven. It's all single sign on, trying to make for a really easy candidate experience.
Yeah, and I went to your website under certifications, and it looks like you have a plethora of programs available. Is that something you could pull up on your screen and just give people perspective?
Sure. Let me just toggle over here.
And to find out more, people would go to your linuxfoundation.org and click on the, I think it's training and certification at the top. Is that right?
That's right. So we've got, I'm just going to stop the share here for a second, and then I'll start it back. Let's see.
So I'm on your website now, and at the top left it says training. And when you click on that, and I could share my screen if you'd like, but it looks like you're not in the same place.
Yeah. So why don't you toggle over to your screen? Because with the screen share, it's slowing it down a little bit on my end. But yeah, if you pop that up, go to training.linux, you go to the courses tab there, just in that second level menu.
Is that showing on your screen now?
It is, yeah.
So
And
again, it looks like you've got a comprehensive set of online training programs.
yeah, a lot of these, there's a mix. There's some that are instructor-led, delivered over the web. There's some that are self-paced. You were just scrolling through our compliance catalog. We actually have a free course coming up in January on compliance for developers that we're excited about. This is our traditional developer catalog here. So things like embedded Linux, things like KVM. And then the enterprise catalog, this is where, as we were talking about earlier, we've been putting a lot of effort to try to make sure that people can keep abreast, not just of Linux and coming into the Linux ecosystem, but learning about all these new open source technologies. You see, we've done some stuff with language translation, trying to expand access. The OpenStack fundamentals at the bottom of your screen. This is the course, the self-paced course that we're in pre-launch mode on.
Right here?
Yep. That's the one we were just taking a peek at. It's not quite ready, but coming soon here. We're about 30 days out. And if you scroll down just a little, you'll start to see some of these other technologies. So things like our instructor-led OpenStack class, the KVM class, the software-defined networking class. And that list is going to expand here as we go into the first half of 2016 with new material coming online.
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Now, your role as general manager, do you oversee all these programs?
That's right.
Who develops the programs?
We have some great, phenomenal people on staff. Dr. Jerry Cooperstein is our training director. He is maintains a lot of our developer courses. And he coordinates with experts from across the Linux community. We try to find the best folks who really have deep knowledge of these projects to help us develop the material. We ask some of our staffers sometimes to come in, take a look at the outlines, make sure that we're heading down the right path. And the key thing for us is, as the Linux Foundation and as really the center of gravity for a lot of what's happening in open source, one of our goals is to always make sure that we're presenting a very neutral stance that is rich on information, that doesn't have a product or service agenda baked into it. Because there is a lot of stuff out there on all of these technologies that's coming from vendors, which is fine. But if what you're trying to do is really learn about the projects and learn about, when are containers appropriate, when is OpenStack appropriate, if I'm using containers, what are the pluses and minuses of using Mesos versus Kubernetes. The Linux Foundation is very well positioned to be that neutral guide because we don't have an agenda. We're not trying to sell you a product. We're not trying to sell you some service on the back end. Really what we want to do is to make sure you understand the concepts of what do these products do, when are they applicable, when are they not, and if they happen to be applicable to you, to give you a pathway to develop those skills.
Is there anything else you want to talk about or share with respect to the OpenStack announcement?
No, I think the key thing is just, we want to make sure that people know that this option is available because clearly this is one of these technologies that there is a lot of interest in and there's not nearly enough skills. And so by providing training that's online, that's affordable, as you saw, that is command line accessible, and being able to then onboard people into the OpenStack Foundation exam, we're hoping for 2016 to be the year where lack of talent stops being the reason that OpenStack isn't widely deployed in production, so that people can really see the benefits of what that brings to bear.
I guess one final question I have, and perhaps we can have you over here at our studio in the new year, but talk a little bit, just closing, you have OpenStack, you have Open Daylight, you have Linux Foundation, and then you have all the vendor community, the Ciscos and the Ericssons, all who are moving from being hardware companies to software companies, and everyone's trying to influence kind of a proprietary version of a Linux platform. How do you balance all those interests?
Well, the thing that we've done here over the past few years is realize that projects sort of take on a life of their own and different ecosystems get interested. And what we've put together, and you'll see this on our site, is a series of what we're calling collaborative projects. And so things like Open Daylight, things like the Open Container Initiative, not everybody who is a Linux Foundation member necessarily wants to be involved in those, and some people who aren't members do want to be involved. Yep. And so rather than try to make everything just a piece of the Linux Foundation, we are facilitating the setup of project-specific foundations, which is traditionally how they've worked. But we're managing that under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation and taking advantage of some of the skills and competencies we have to try to make sure that there's good best practices in how code is developed and how code is shared, that there's good solid governance models for these projects. And so we're helping to incubate these things. We're trying to provide some of our lessons learned to make sure that the governance runs smoothly and the process of developing the code runs smoothly. But they continue to be independent projects, and they continue to be, fascinating dynamics of different companies coming together that you might think are competitors and that are realizing that collaborative development is how software gets built. And so you just, it's the new normal to, collaborate on the development and then go out and compete fiercely for customers on the basis of, the additional value adds that your product brings, and to get away from this mindset of we should all retreat to our corners and start writing software, because that's the past. It's certainly not the future.
I know in the space of the carriers, and I assume on the enterprise side, they don't want to be locked in to vendors, and so they're the ones really driving the open source initiative, and at least that's what we see on our side. I assume that's kind of what you're seeing on your side.
Yeah, open source has just a ton of benefits, right? And the breadth of scale, the breadth of talent that you get, lots of eyeballs on the problems. Linus's famous quote about given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And it's not and or, it's both, right? There continues to be thriving vendor ecosystems everywhere. These are never going to go away. It's just that the basis of competition is shifting slightly as people realize that collaborative development is how you get the best possible software with the best possible features and still ensure that there's interoperability and portability. And so open source isn't trying to replace that, but we're trying to focus on what it does well, which is massive development of software at scale. And there continues to be rich vendor ecosystems because that's how the world goes around.
Well, thank you, Clyde, for your time today. I look forward to having you here in the studio.
This was great, Jack. Thanks for having me.